12 weeks unpaid while supporting a new baby, then have to go back to work and face consequences of having that child and of being on that leave. To possibly lose your job or even lose the chances of getting a promotion because you had a child, that would be extremely frustrating, right? This is why Anne Hathaway spoke up for us, not just for the moms who have the child, but both parents who deserve the chance to get off of work. On International Women's Day, Anne Hathaway talked about the problems for women and families within our jobs and corporations. Most of the points given and the data provided will show how much of a struggle a workforce can make for women and families. Anne Hathaway presses the problems of unpaid pregnancy and parental rights with the United Nations in order to fight for more rights that are economically and physically needed. To start off, who is Anne Hathaway? Anne Hathaway was born on November 12, 1982 in Brooklyn, New York. This is where she grew up with her two brothers, her father, and her mother. She was an actress and she advocated at a very young age. Her mother was a stay-at-home mom to raise the three kids, while her father worked to provide the main income. Anne Hathaway stated he was the breadwinner of the family. When her mother could no longer bring her to auditions, she would ride the train to where she would meet her father. He would then leave his work and bring her to her auditions. This was really the only time she was able to spend time with him. Becoming a mother herself brought on the idea for the speech and how hard it was for her to get back into her daily routine with a new child. She struggled walking a week after giving birth, and let alone women are forced back into work just days after giving birth. When and where? Anne Hathaway gave this speech on International Women's Day. There are speeches held every year on March 8th. Anne Hathaway gave her speech about women's rights in 2017. This had been her first speech since becoming a Goodwill Ambassador in June of 2016. This speech was at the United Nations observance in front of the President of the General Assembly, supervisors, Director of the UN Women, and men and women from the public, along with hundreds of thousands of views from the UN Nations channel.
For the U.S.'s policy on maternity leave flashed in my mind. American women are currently entitled to 12 weeks unpaid leave. American men are entitled to nothing. That information landed differently for me when 1 week after my son's birth, I could barely walk. That information landed differently when I was getting to know a human who was completely dependent on my husband and I for everything, when I was dependent on my husband for most things, and when we were relearning everything we thought we knew about our family and our relationship. It landed differently. Somehow, we and every American parent were expected to be back to normal in under 3 months. Without income? I remember thinking to myself, if the practical reality of pregnancy is another mouth to feed in your home, and America is a country where most people are living paycheck to paycheck, how does 12 weeks unpaid leave economically work? The truth is, for too many people, it doesn't. 1 in 4 American women go back to work 2 weeks after giving birth because they can't afford to take off any more time than that. That's 25% of American women. Equally disturbing, women who can afford to take a full 12 weeks often don't, because it'll mean incurring a motherhood penalty, meaning they will be perceived as less dedicated to their job and will be passed over for promotions and other career advancement. In my own household, my mother had to choose between a career and raising 3 children, a choice that left her unpaid and underappreciated as a homemaker, because there just wasn't support for both paths. For the U.S.'s
Significance. The importance for parental leave for both parents after having a newborn is completely needed. Not just to recover, but to have that chance to bond with that new child. 12 weeks of unpaid leave is extremely harsh on the family, especially those living paycheck to paycheck. Parents who cannot afford to go on that leave have to go back to work right after having a child. This could result in medical trauma, lack of support for the baby, and many other problems. Anne Hathaway talks about how the United Nations was currently in the process of changing the policy of unpaid leave. She also calls out companies, jobs, etc. for not having paid maternal leave and how harsh that is for families. This has brought a lot of attention to this conversation and has changed parental leave for good. Persuasion techniques. Pathos. She is the UN Ambassador for Women since July 2016. She is able to make connections between politically to speakers and the public. She is famous, well, everyone knows and is aware of. She's made connections with the public that by talking about children's, women's, and parents' rights. And she has gained popularity this way and has left for this to get more views and more publicity. She has also been able to make a connection to the crowd because she is a mom herself and she was able to talk about her experiences. Pathos. She was able to make deep connections with the audience and viewers by talking about her emotional and physical experiences. This has allowed the audience to be more connected and into the speech. She has also talked to the mothers and fathers who cannot afford to go on unpaid leave, and has made it aware to everybody of the struggles that no one talks about. This has allowed the audience to see why parental leave is needed in society and that unpaid leave is useless to parents who cannot afford to miss work. Logos. Throughout the entire speech, she brings up several data examples and percentages. This allows the audience to see the true effects of unpaid leave for parents and how useless it is to society. Giving proof of these hardships of these parents puts into perspective for the audience of how things are, and if they're unaware of what's going on, how they can do to help. Rhetorical devices. Hypophora. We must ask ourselves how will we be more tomorrow than we are today? She talks about how we can better ourselves in this situation starting now so we can make things better for the future. Amplification. This information landed differently for me when she stated this sentence several times along with examples of how she knows the struggles of being a new parent. This catches the crowd's attention and shows Anne Hathaway's connection to the crowd. Illusion. Every generation must find their north. This alludes to her previous phrase she said in the beginning of her speech about how her dad would always ask where her north was, and kept asking this after they went to every audition. This allowed her to find her sense of direction, and she thinks everyone must have that experience and should learn their own sense of direction. How will this speech endure? This speech has allowed for changes that are happening for parents and gaining parental leave. The United Nations has changed their policy, jobs and businesses are taking accountability, and this has allowed the change for the future. Thank you for listening to my speech.